I call the Honourable Member Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to speak in the third reading of the Trademarks, International Treaties and Enforcement Amendment Bill and the Copyright Amendment Bill number 2. This is another piece of quality labour-initiated legislation that this government did eventually adopt as its own, although it has taken a rather long time to get to this point, which has been well canvassed. It's not a bad piece of legislation, and it deservedly has the support of the House. And while the subject matter might appear to be dry to some, we shouldn't underestimate the importance of this bill, and a number of my colleagues have addressed that. Ensuring that our intellectual property law and enforcement measures are appropriate and effective is fundamentally important to protecting and promoting a healthy business environment in this country. And as I note my colleague, the Honourable Marion Street, has pointed out, that the landscape in these 2.5 or nearly 3 years has changed markedly around this whole issue of intellectual property, and it's really important to note that, and I'll make some more remarks on that later on. It's an important piece of legislation because it harmonises our laws with international standards. It furthers New Zealand's commitment to building international trade rules, which are vital to ensure that trade is free and fair, and it puts measures in place to deal with the enormous problem worldwide in counterfeit goods and growing problem worldwide in counterfeit goods, and importantly it enables innovative New Zealand companies to more easily protect their trademarks in multiple jurisdictions, which is a really important fundamental thing that this bill will hopefully do. As most members present are no doubt aware, this bill has two major functions. It's to bring the New Zealand trademark law into line with the requirements of the Madrid Protocol, the Nice Agreement and the Singapore Treaty, and it seeks to enhance the abilities of the appropriate enforcement agencies under the Trademark Act and the Copyright Acts, so that they've got the necessary powers to crack down on criminal activity in this area. These international commitments that are being made through harmonising with the treaties are an excellent step forward for New Zealand businesses and rights holders, but such commitments are only effective if they are supported by good law at home, and it is essential that the government officials have the ability to do their job, especially with the changing landscape of intellectual property infringement. And in the last decade, the Customs Service has detected a considerable increase in the traffic of counterfeited material coming into this country, and I think somewhere it's mentioned how much that is. I think the New Zealand Customs Service reported that the volumes of counterfeited goods had risen by over 400% since July 2000, with 260,000 items detained by them each year. Now, a number of my colleagues during the debate have talked about that. And this is expected to rise over a wider range of products. And the Ministry of Economic Development has already signalled that the current laws around intellectual property are inadequate for effectively policing this assault. So this bill addresses that concern by giving enforcement officers from Customs and the MED greater powers, including the ability to enter and examine premises without a search warrant where there is a suspected breach of the law, and to thoroughly search the premises if a search warrant has been obtained. Those powers are also extended to the police to allow them to carry out their duties with regards to issues like piracy. The empowerment of government officials with regard to criminal activity is not a decision that should be made lightly, and I think it's an issue that the Green MP David Clendon raised during the second reading and his colleague Keith Locke did during the committee process. However, we know, and I think we can be satisfied, that the powers given to Customs and the MED are appropriate, considering the work that they're required to do. And some in the media painted a picture of an MED hit squad making raids on the warehouses of innocent importers, delaying the sale of their products and hurting their profits. And while it's impossible to guarantee that this would never happen in isolated cases, but the benefits of a more robust enforcement regime far outweigh those speculative costs, and the protection of intellectual property rights is central to a well-performing economy, and this law will actually improve the economic environment by ensuring that the rights holders know their intellectual property remains theirs and consumers can have confidence in the quality of the goods and the services that they're purchasing. And that is really important, and I do want to stress that, because we're talking about criminal activity here for the purposes of counterfeiting goods, pushing them across borders and then selling them on. And that is an issue that we really do need to spend time addressing, and this bill does. And Mr. Speaker, this law effectively updates a piece of legislation and it brings it into line with the need to address that increased criminal behaviour and the techniques used to breach trademarks and copyright, and the enormous issues with regard to the movement of counterfeit goods across borders. And it's commendable that the government's pushing this, but it does raise an important issue with regards to other pieces of legislation that have been before this House recently, and in particular the Copyright Infringement and File Sharing Act, because it highlights the importance of members of Parliament, members of select committees, and in particular ministers being on top of their briefs, on top of their areas, and being able to grasp the nature of change, in particular technological change, and the impact that it's having on behaviours of consumers, i.e. citizens, and business models. And I'm referring to the importance of updating legislation to ensure that the law and the regulatory and operational response to breaches of the law is appropriate and effective and up with the times. And this government and this Parliament saw the passage of a bill, the Copyright Infringement File Sharing Bill, which wasn't addressing criminal behaviour, it was addressing civil infringement, and of which there was an enormous amount of time spent in the last couple of years trying to work out how to address it. But that bill was passed under urgency, which solely focused on measures to push vast numbers of New Zealanders who access, illegally download and share material that they either can't get any other way or would have to wait for a very long time to access, when the distribution channels for that material, whether it's music, movies, music or TV programs or whatever, are locked in a mindset of a previous century and prefer to turn our kids and ordinary citizens into criminals rather than change the way that their businesses operate to deliver what the market so obviously wants. Now, it's important to have that law because people should be deterred from illegal behaviour, but it was ridiculous to contemplate disconnecting them from the internet, and it's also ridiculous to introduce it under urgency without taking a wider look at the whole copyright regime. And that's why it relates to this bill, Mr. Speaker, and what government should be doing to encourage new business models emerging in our country or being allowed into our country to distribute content that is affordable in real time. So my point is that with this bill before us, as with any other bill that is being updated and changed and harmonised in relation to other legislation and treaties around the world, we have a responsibility as parliamentarians to bring ourselves up to speed with technology changes and its enormous impact on the way that we're conducting many parts of our lives. We've got a responsibility to assess all pieces of legislation to see what impact changing technology has on it, and this legislation is no exception. Labor supports it. It was originally ours, and we are evolved enough as a party to acknowledge that we must change with the times. Perhaps it's time that the members on the other side of the House acknowledged that too.
Dr. Paul Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on this very important trademarks international treaty.